This transfer saga has been absolutely crazy, and I've held off on making this video for a couple of days because I wanted a bit of clarity. Liverpool wanted Isak or Ekitike, Newcastle wanted both of them, and they've been playing this game of cat and mouse very publicly, putting words in the ears of certain journalists to get media pressure on certain sides and force the narrative a little bit. But it looks like today, in the last hour or so, we've got a bit of clarity, and I'm going to talk all things Isak staying at Newcastle apparently, and Ekitike to Liverpool, which is, look, I suppose people wouldn't have expected this to be the outcome, but I probably did, and I think it's probably the best outcome for Liverpool, as hot of a take that is. So Ornstein's just posted not very long ago saying that Liverpool are advancing with the talks with Frankfurt over the Hugo Ekitike transfer. And if we just scroll through and highlight some of the main talking points of what's actually happening, the club's proposed package to sign the 23-year-old striker is in excess of 80 million euros, so about 70 million pounds, and personal terms are not expected to be of an issue. Why would they? Liverpool are building this team of Premier League Galacticos almost. They've brought the Galacticos and the Galactico model to the Premier League, and they've done it in a sensible way. I know if you think about the best teams assembled of all time in terms of names, Real Madrid are probably able to boast that they've held claim to most of them. They've almost just pickpocketed the best players in the world, not necessarily always considering how they fit best with the rest of the team. Liverpool, we know, Michael Edwards and co are extremely smart, data-driven appropriately. They play on the eye test. They take into account how well a player might integrate, their personality, all of these things. They're incredibly smart in terms of who they sign, and we can see that in, the historically good transfers of Alisson, Van Dijk, Sadio Mane, Firmino, Mohamed Salah, Wijnaldum, Gravenberch now. And when you have a team that good in the back room, in terms of scouting, in terms of analysis, in terms of bringing the right players in, the right personalities, the right cultural fits into your squad, and you've given them a budget of, God knows, 300 million or whatever, and they're making signings like Ekitike, Verts, apparently Rodrigo is a player who they really like and they want to sign. I mean, it is scary. And I know a few Liverpool fans online I've been reading are a little bit wary of that transfer fee. They think that they're overpaying for Ekitike. Look, I think Ekitike is worth that much money. Relative to how much you're spending on an Isak, look, if you could go back in time and say, look, would you sign Isak for 65 to 70 million just before Newcastle signed him? I think most people would say yes. Liverpool would say yes. Most teams would say yes. Most fans would say yes. And if you're taking that approach, Ekitike, in my opinion, is at that level, certainly at least at that level of Isak at Real Sociedad. And I was a big fan of that Sociedad team. David Silva, my favourite player of all time, had moved from Manchester City to Sociedad. So I was keen on watching a lot of their games. I think Odegaard played for them for a while. Januzaj was in that team. Oyarzabal was brilliant. And Isak was the player who led the line in that team, and his finishing was hit and miss. In the same way that people have had criticisms about Ekitike's finishing, I think you could make the same arguments and the same critiques for a young Isak. And Ekitike, he's led the line for the 21s for France. He's held himself in great regard in such an impressive campaign last season. I know he's not put up the most goals, but I think he gets involved in general play in terms of his passing, his facilitation, perhaps his pressing and defensive work as well, in a greater capacity than, in my opinion, Isak did all those years ago. Now, I know Liverpool need a signing, a number 9 who's going to make the difference immediately, and that's always what you want to do when you are a team challenging at the top of the league. But look, they did really well. They won the league. They were incredibly impressive last season, and they didn't really have great number 9 options. I think, the only sort of natural scorer who could play down the middle was, rest in peace, Diogo Jota. And the other alternative options were players who weren't the best at putting their chances away. And Liverpool still got goals, I know, primarily through Mohamed Salah, but they've bought in Florian Wirtz now. They've bought in a player who can still put the ball, or it looks like they've bought a player who can still put the ball in the back of the net, but you don't necessarily need the most clinical finisher in the world right now, as long as they get in great positions, as long as they can facilitate for others to create chances in those transition situations, but also to attack the box and be a great player in and around those packed defences. And Ekitike, in my opinion, has it all. This fee, look, it says Frankfurt rejected an offer from Newcastle around the region of 65 million, and that's only a couple of days ago. It's a brilliant point here that they've actually shifted their attentions to what seems to be Brentford's Johan Wissa. And this is all a big domino effect. It's absolutely crazy what the implications that Liverpool's transfer targets have on the rest of the league. Liverpool, if they go for Ekitike instead of Isak, Newcastle go for Wissa. If Brentford sell Wissa rather than Mbumo, then who do United get? There's this whole merry-go-round of transfers that rely on one transfer happening, whether that's Liverpool making that transfer or Newcastle or whoever. So, look, they rejected that fee, and look, when you've got that sort of bidding war, they can absolutely reject that fee. Fair enough for Frankfurt. I think £70 million is still a fair enough buy. I wouldn't bat an eye at that fee if Liverpool were to make that transfer. And I think one of the reasons why it's so impressive and one of the reasons why it's so good, in my opinion, is as a 23-year-old, perhaps he's not going to give you a better season than Isak next year, right off the bat. But like I've said, in Liverpool's best years, when rebuilding, they did very heavy investment that planned for the long term. You look at Alisson, you look at Van Dijk, and they were record-breaking fees in their position in a very short span of time. And it meant that, look, for 7, 8 or 9 years, they've had two of the best players in the world in their positions, and they've not had to bat an eye. You play them, you don't need to think about that. And they raise the levels of your team. They push the ceiling of your team so highly that, look, you compete on all fronts. Mohamed Salah is another one. He's more of a sensible and slightly riskier buy, but they invested heavily in Mohamed Salah, in Sadio Mane, in Firmino, and they gave the club 6 or so years at the highest level. You don't need to chop and change too much when you've got such a stable, strong core. And a 23-year-old of that quality for 70 million would look like a bargain if he can play 6, 7 years at the highest level, facilitating for the other players and with the ability to improve his finishing, growing into using his frame a little bit better. And in the same way that Isak translated his game, I think Ekitike certainly can do that. And he's used to playing in a more physical, transitional way, having been in the Bundesliga, having played in France growing up. I think they're more physical and more easily translatable leagues to the Premier League at the moment as well. And how impressive is that? We've got some analysis from The Athletic, from the Liverpool correspondent, and he goes that Isak has been Liverpool's ideal number 9 target, which is true, but that Ekitike is the ideal profile for a Liverpool side at the moment. I think he echoes some of the points I've already made. Slot tried a number of options in that role, with Diaz being his preferred selection. It was a tricky position to play in, though, with plenty demanded and goals didn't flow for any of those who operated there. I think one thing that Luis Diaz did do brilliantly down the middle for Liverpool was press really well, and it meant that some of the energy around the rest of the team could be conserved a little bit more, particularly in the wingers. I think the pressing quality of Luis Diaz mirrors most closely Ekitike's ability to contribute in defence and press hard and back press and track back as well. And you need legs in the front line to accommodate for, I think, an aging Mohamed Salah. You want Mohamed Salah closer to the goal. You want him to be able to preserve his legs and not have to track back as much. And I think that's probably in the minds of Liverpool a little bit as well, that temperament. Verts, I think, top of dispossessions in the opposition's final third. Again, a wicked presser, one of the best attacking players at pressing in world football. You have two of those alongside Mohamed Salah in your front line, and I think Mohamed Salah's lack of pressing is a non-issue because of how good you've got your defensive contribution around him, which, look, it pains me as a Manchester City fan, as somebody who's trying to be completely objective and neutral. This is some of the best business and arguably one of the best transfer windows that I've seen in a long time. This can come back to bite me because they've obviously invested so heavily, but this is such a smart move, in my opinion. Things can go wrong, injuries can happen, players can get homesick, they can, have arguments and things like that, and things outside of the control of the football pitch. But going strictly on the qualities of these players, particularly Ekitike in this situation, brilliant buy. I can't stress enough how good a player Ekitike is. And I think most people, most Liverpool fans and most Premier League fans don't appreciate just how good he is. They're referencing the PSG years and how he didn't fit in there. But look, if one player doesn't fit in a certain environment, it doesn't make them a bad player. If they've shown the ability to scale really proficiently and they've got a wide array of skill sets that match up perfectly to what your environment and what your team need, then that's the most important thing. And I think he fits into the slot side perfectly. We'll see if there's any more twists and tails to this saga. But Ekitike, for me, absolutely wonderful player. I've actually done a video talking about his strengths and his weaknesses more broadly, just waxing lyrical about him, to be honest, because I'm such a big fan of his, and I'll link that at the end of this video. You'll probably see it on screen some point now, and I'll put it in the description as well. So if you want a little bit more of an analytical view, then that video is for you. Let me know what you think of this saga. Are you happy with this transfer move? And tell me who you support, because I think that changes your answer for that question that I've just asked. I'll catch you in the next one.